Hey guys, welcome into the show today. We're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be talking to podcaster, filmmaker Bill Fulkerson. You may know his name from outside the cinema. And if you listen to BGH, you know we've been talking lately a lot about his documentary, Survival of the Film Freaks, which is maybe most well known for having me in it, I think, Bill.
That's most likely the reason why the film was made, specifically so I could do a documentary that I could feature you in.
People are like, oh wait, is this the Eric Newell documentary? Holy shit.
I've heard about this for years. This is amazing. It actually happened.
We actually, so a couple weeks ago on the show, because I've been talking about this thing for a while because, you know, we did the interview, I think, last winter, and, like, it's been a while, so you guys have been going through post-production, and now you're doing, like, a festival run, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but I think, like, the guys in the show was just this thing they weren't really paying attention to. It was kind of like whatever.
It almost seemed like they didn't believe you when you told them you had actually seen it.
They kind of didn't believe me, yeah. And then so that it was a real thing, sort of. You know what I mean? So we were having a discussion about it a couple weeks ago. I was giving out the dates that it was playing, and Mark went on IMDb and looked it up, and he's like, "Dude, you have an IMDb page." And so that became a whole joke because then we were looking it up, and I was down like 40 million spots or something from the previous week.
Maybe you're up this week because we had a good screening.
Also,
recently.
I have a bone to pick with you because I'm the last credit listed on IMDb.
Are you real? I think I don't. The weird thing with that stuff is they order it automatically. So I don't know. I'm wondering if that's maybe got something to do with previous credits or something. Because when we put it in, you can choose who you want to feature on the top. And no offense, Ted Raimi's going in before you.
Just kidding.
But like I think the rest of it might be ranked on like previous credits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know though.
Yeah,
I mean, I would have put you last regardless. So
it was funny, but yeah, and it was my first credit, so there you go. But yeah, so I have seen this movie. It's really great. We're going to talk about it in a little bit. I want to talk about a little bit about podcasting today because we.
I know a thing about that. So
yeah. You've been doing Outside the Cinema for how long now? When did you guys start?
Oh, geez, it'll be just about 11 years. I think it's 11. It'll be 11 years, like January.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you guys have been around a little longer than we have.
No, I think you guys actually started a tiny bit before us. I feel like you guys are probably maybe a couple months ahead.
I guess we did our 10-year last year, maybe. So we started October 2007.
Yeah, so I think we started January following that because we're at what 500 and at this time 558 episodes.
Damn, you guys are ahead of us. We've taken way more breaks than you apparently.
Oh, well, that's one of my most prideful things is we've never missed a week. We've had an episode out every single week since we started.
Yeah. See, we try to build in every couple of months a little break because it gets hard like coordinating all of us, and I feel like we get burned out a little bit.
Oh yeah, you got like 37 people on your show.
That's especially amazing. I feel like considering the types of movies you guys listen to, like watch, because I've done a few of your shows, and they're hard to get through sometimes.
Yeah, movies. It can really beat you down. But the thing, I mean, we've had an episode every week, but we've built in breaks. Well, what we'll do is like. I mean, because we've also had like, like I had a kid and I've had 2 back surgeries and like we've had all this stuff.
Yeah.
I've sold and moved 2 houses. So we will build in like we'll double up and record like 2 episodes at a time, knowing that we're going to do a break. Like, OK, so like, come February, we're going to take like 3 weeks off. So we'll pre-record 3 episodes and then release them.
Yeah.
So it gives the illusion that we're recording every single week. But there's also that like, built in section that we know what we're going to do, and then we'll also break away from the format and do like stuff that we don't want to stab our eyes out.
I mean, what was the concept of OTC from the beginning? Because it's really what you guys do is a little different than what we do.
Well, I mean, it's funny because we started with kind of a more like we were going to do horror movies because like that's kind of I feel like that's where we all kind of start in your if you're a cult movie fan, like horror is almost always where you start. Nobody dives in head first with like Gaspar Noé or like Jodorowsky. That's kind of like something you come to afterwards. But I was a musician for many years and I played in hardcore bands, so I was like DIY guy that would play basement shows and like in churches and all that stuff. So I stopped playing music, but I'm the type of guy that likes to always have stuff going on. So podcasting was kind of coming into its own at the end of kind of like that first cycle, like when Adam Curry and guys like that were the only people that were doing podcasts. And I discovered a bunch of shows, one of them being Cinema Diabolic, and I was like, yo, I'm like, I can do this. I'm like, because I'm like, I watch these movies. And so just kind of, got a, couple of mics, and it sounded like crap for the first couple months. I got a co-host that ended up not being the right co-host and
Oh, I didn't even know there was another co-host.
oh yeah, there's this guy named Ryan who was the co-host for the first year of
Oh, that
OTC.
makes sense because when you email you in Gmail, it says Ryan.
Yeah, and I've changed it
That's
100
hilarious.
times, and it never like adjusts itself.
Mystery solved.
Yeah, so he was around for about a year, but he just wasn't committed to it. And then we brought Chris in, but it we I got not that I got bored with horror, but like I really wanted to kind of like explore like other fringe cinema. And I'm a cult movie fan in general, so like horror is obviously a huge part of cult films, which kind of ties into the documentary that we'll talk about, obviously. But um, I just kind of wanted to start covering the stuff that other people weren't covering. So I started doing digging and finding weird, cult movies on the internet and all this other stuff. So we kind of, or I say I made the decision about halfway through that first year, maybe 10 months, that here's the new rule. We're doing weird films. They have to be at least 10 years old and kind of have some type of cult genre appeal. And that's kind of like the general rule of thumbs with the stuff we pick. But I try to find stuff that like is like just out there. I mean, we cover normal, like more normal straight ahead stuff, but I like doing stuff that other shows aren't covering because I don't want to hear
you
the
definitely
same.
do.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too. I mean, it gets boring where it's like I feel like everybody has their go-to show. Like you guys, you're the go-to for like new horror releases, theatrical and like Trick or Treat Radio. Those are the dudes you go to when you want to watch when they're the VOD guys. And so I feel like OTC we wanted to be where the weird stuff when you're looking to discover weird out there stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you mentioned your like music background. That was one of the things that always. So I've been on OTC a few times. It's been a while, and actually, in a second, I actually went and looked back to our first email conversation, which is kind of a funny thing about email that I can just like pinpoint that. But like your show was always very musical and always like really well produced. And I've mentioned this on our show before, but there have been several points where sort of like I would go on your show and be like, fuck, this show sounds so good. I need to make our show sound better. And then like you can almost tie that to these certain cycles where I've then gone back and revamped everything from top to bottom. But talk about that music part a little bit because music does really play. I mean, not just from the production, but you guys cover a lot of music too.
Yeah, and it's I mean OTC kind of is like this like umbrella with a bunch of type of little things kind of underneath it. Not so much recently because the filmmaking stuff's kind of taken a much more front seat, but we'll do bonus episodes where we'll choose like a music genre or like a specific type of list or something, and we'll bring in friends that are more musically inclined and build these great episodes of like 90s alternative bands. What's your 10 favorite 90s alternative records? And back in the day we used a lot of like local hardcore music and local punk music to kind of like use to like bridge breaks. I don't do that much production stuff on the show anymore. It's much more just kind of like turn the mics on and go, and that's more just a necessity of not having the time to put into it that I used to. But we've always made sure that like music has been a big part of the show, and being that's where it came from, that's kind of where the production quality came from too. Because I know when I used to like play guitar, like I didn't want to have a piece of junk amp. I wanted it to sound good. It's like if you want to do well, I feel like you want to sound good, and that was kind of like a thing back in, going back 7-8 years with podcasting. Whereas it's like, yeah, everybody can podcast, but it's like make your show sound good. I mean, there's all kinds of shows I can remember that I just didn't pay attention to because I'd listen to the first,
I still
like
do
10
that sometimes.
minutes. Yeah, and it sounds like it's recorded with 2 tin cans, and you're like, "What the heck?" I'm like, "I can't listen to that." And those are always the shows that were like 2.5 hours long. So it was like nothing against anybody. I mean, if anyone you want to do a podcast, use what you got. But I was from the mindset of like, I will put a little money into this. I'll buy a decent mixer. I'll buy decent microphones. I'm like, because if I'm going to do this, I want it to do well, and I want it to sound like a terrestrial radio show because podcasts, essentially are a replacement for terrestrial radio. So that was always something I wanted to do, was make sure that I had to put a little bit of money into it, but I felt like the return on the enjoyment for the listener was worth that money.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's really interesting. Like I've always had that feeling. I feel like especially those early podcasting days, there's a little bit of like an inferiority complex because it was like still to this day you walk around, you talk to like a quote unquote normie, and they just have no idea what a podcast is. A lot of people.
Right.
It's certainly penetrated more, but back in the day it was like you couldn't even if you sat down and tried to describe it to somebody. And so I feel like there was a lot of like, well, no, we can do that. Like we can do that thing they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it was always like, I mean, it's awesome when anyone wants to put in the effort. But I was one of those people. I'm like, I'm not going to be lazy about it. Like if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And there was a lot of people. I got a lot of flack from different podcasting circles of like people that were like thought I was a dick because I was so like, no, this needs to be good. Like I want to put it into it, and like it was weird. It was kind of it was like you bring up the inferiority complex, and I remember like I got into it with a number of different hosts that just like thought they didn't know me, but they thought they thought I was an asshole because like I was so like into doing what I was doing and
Yeah.
wanting it to be better. And then when we got successful, like I was proud of that, and I was a jerk for being successful. It was a very
There
bizarre.
was actually like a lot of drama back then, even just in the like horror podcasting circles, like
Yeah,
stuff that at the point that I saw it forming, that was kind of when we just sort of took a step back and I was like, I feel like we could just be above this and not deal with all
yeah.
this.
You guys always kind of like have always kind of run with your own thing. Like you're friendly with a lot of people, and you guys are good dudes. So like that kind of shines through. And I feel like that's ended up kind of what happened with us and like the shows we were friends with. But you know, like we were all in like communities together and stuff, and then it just got to the point where it's just like this is like why is everyone taking this shit so serious?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was like, I don't know if you remember like the Horror Network, I think it was called or something, it was like the Horror Podcasting Network. Like there was
I
a lot
remember.
of like people trying to work together to try to amplify our voices. But then I think it was just like a lot of natural stuff that happens when a bunch of people with
Mm,
semi competing interests tries to work together. Like I think on paper it's like, hey, we're all on the same team, but really we are kind of all competing for the same ears in some ways. You know what I mean? And
exactly.
so
Yeah.
I think there was just a lot of ego stuff and that kind of thing. But
It's different now because none of our shows like have that type of pull that they used to because podcasting is so mainstream now. I mean, in the general sense of it, like every comedian has got a podcast. It seems like
yeah.
every actor has got a podcast. So it's like if you were to start a show now, like getting penetration into the market is nearly impossible because nobody can even find your show.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on your subject matter. I feel like with horror podcasts, it's like you find a person that's way into horror podcasts, and they'll listen to almost anything
Right. Yeah.
once. You know what I mean?
I'm thinking more like the generalized listener
Yeah,
of
sure.
like somebody is looking for a movie review podcast. They're never going to get to guys like me or like you because they're
Right,
going to
right,
get
right.
Doug Benson and like Kevin Smith and all these other guys. They're not even going to be able to get past that first layer unless they really try. And
Yeah,
that's one of the things that like is so tough now. And this kind of goes back to the documentary again of people like things easy. They don't want to have to work at anything.
right. So could you guess in your head when was the first time I was on OTC, roughly?
Oh man, I feel like it was fairly early on because I feel like we've been friends for quite a while now. Let's see, I don't know, maybe summer 2008, 2009, maybe.
It was actually, well, so at 2008, 2009, I was still living in Florida. So it was actually February 2010.
Oh, that was later than I thought it was.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing I was reminded of, because it's all saved in this email thread for posterity, is that I remember like there was a couple different routes to get to your place, which was like, so I was kind of south of Boston, you were kind of north.
This is when I lived in Lynn, right?
Yeah, and on the way back, I got caught. I went over the bridge. I didn't have any cash on me. I didn't have an Easy Pass, and it's like a $10 toll or some shit. And I had to stop in traffic and fill out a card, giving them my information so they could send me a bill. Oh, literally in the email, I'm like, yeah, I got totally fucked on the way home. Made me laugh.
That's the days, man. Now you just drive through and they just send it to you in the mail. So
Yeah. So talk to me. Let's talk about Survival of the Film Freaks. Like, I think people who meet you now might just see like, oh, here's, director, producer Bill Fulkerson or whatever, but I feel like there's a lot of value for people in learning more about that journey, right? Because you're really like a self-made filmmaker, and it's really been something that's happened in the last 2 years, let's say.
yeah, it's I never thought that I was going to become a filmmaker. That was never the plan. Like when I started the podcast, a decade ago, I was never like, oh, well, this is my big master plan to become a movie producer and director later on. It just kind of happened, and uh, I've been really lucky with it because this project is gone so smoothly. I'm sure like whatever I start to work on next, the chances of it going this smoothly are probably a fraction of the way this one did. But it really was just a kind of thing where I came up with a specific idea for this documentary, and it was felt like, and Kyle's really good at saying this too, it kind of felt like this kind of culmination of the 10 years of doing the podcast and reviewing cult films, and just kind of even the changes in technology that have happened in the time that I've done that. And it really felt like a good project to kind of tie that all together. And present it in kind of a new way, but still be able to lean back on that stuff, because podcasting actually is a pretty, big part of the film, because there's a bunch of podcasters and, you're
Right.
in it. My co-host Chris is in it. A couple of the guys from Trick or Treat Radio are in it. So like, it was this like project that kind of came up that if it wasn't for Kyle wouldn't have gotten made, because I had the idea, but I don't know how to make a movie. The only stuff I've ever filmed was stuff, for the podcast. I'd create like trailers for our like live events, or like we would do, because we did a live stream for a lot of years, but like I never like directed or produced any type of video stuff. So I, came up with the idea. I wrote this crazy like 6-7 page stream of consciousness kind of treatment for it. And I called Kyle, because I knew Kyle from he did a documentary called Phantasm about 6 or 7 years ago that we were in, and I just kept in contact with them, and we'd become friends. And I was just kind of like, hey man, I'm like, I don't know if you're interested in doing another documentary or not, but I'm like, I've got this idea. I'm like, I think it's pretty cool. Can you just read over this stuff and tell me if it's something you would be interested in, at least kind of learning a little bit more about and maybe being a part of? And he was like, yeah, I don't know, because he lived Kyle's from Connecticut, but at this time he had moved out to LA because he went to school for film. I went to Syracuse, and then he moved out to LA, to pursue a film career,
Yeah.
like so many people do. And he was kind of like finding it hard, because he's a genre guy and he has very specific things you want to do. And LA is a much different way of living out there.
It's
Especially if
like,
you're trying
hey,
to
work on this reality show so you can pay your bills and then try to do your
exactly,
thing in
yeah,
your spare time.
exactly. So he was kind of having a hard time. He's done some stuff, and but I was kind of like, hey, and he's like, I don't know if I really want to do a documentary, but well, send it to me, and I'll read over it. So he read over all the stuff I sent him, and he got back to me pretty quickly and was like, yeah, this sounds pretty cool. He's like, so what do you want me to do with it? Like, thing, and be like, oh, I'll just have you film it, or like something like that. And I'm like, well, no, I want you to make it with me. And he's like, what does that mean? I'm like, I want to split everything, co-director, co-produce, co-write, the whole nine, because I'm like, you've got all of the technical stuff that I don't have, and I'm like, I have that cult movie background that you don't necessarily have. I'm like, so I feel like the two of us together would make a really great team. And I was right, luckily, and it took, like it took about almost 2 years to the day to have the completed cut. So it was this great journey, man. But like, it was never in the plan.
I mean, how fast before you guys actually started getting into production, like actually shooting people?
Let's see, I think me and him decided to do it in like the early spring so it's 2018, early spring, I'd say, of 2016. So like probably, like a little over 2 years ago, if that time works right. But so we decided to do it. And so then we did all the pre-production on the hush hush and didn't say anything to anyone, and basically kind of was like, okay, so here's an outline, here's a treatment of what I think it'll run like, here's a master list of the people we'd like to interview, like pie in the sky, throwing names on it like Tarantino, and then we kind of were like, all right, here's like the type of interview questions we should ask. And then we kind of pared it down a little bit more to like what we thought was like an achievable thing, knowing that we weren't going to have a budget because we were going to make it on our own dime. We purposely didn't want to crowdfund anything. We were like, we want to do this ourselves so we don't owe anybody anything in case, things go left, or, you know how it is. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'd say we took probably 4 months or so of just kind of pre-production prep and keeping everything on the down low. We contacted Mike White, who does the projection booth, who has a number of contacts, and he decided he would like to come on and help in an executive producer role, and also kind of facilitate some of the early interviews. So like he's the guy that got us Ted Raimi, he got us Graydon Clark, he got us Chris Gore. So like he was kind of like, he was in and was like, yeah, this project sounds great, I would love to be part of it. So then about the beginning of the summer of that year, we announced that we were doing it. So I'd say probably midway through June. And that was because we had been able to secure at least a handful of early interviews. And we're like, okay, I feel like we can say something about this now, start to get people excited, maybe get the word out there. So that way, if we pursue some more interviews, we can be like, oh, people are interested in it. And I think the first filming trip we made was August. I flew out to LA in August of 2016. And we sat down with Ted Raimi and did our first interview.
How was that? Was that intimidating?
Super intimidating.
I mean, he's funny in it too, because he's so chill and just like confident in his voice. Like he's literally just like got his arm, he's just like hanging out. And, and
he was an incredibly nice guy, super conversational. But yeah, it was intimidating, especially for me, because I'd never been on what a quote unquote film set, and I know it's a documentary film set, so it's not the same as like doing a narrative or something like that. But we were lucky enough, we were able to film at a studio with a gentleman named Jim Coons, who you might not know his name, but you've literally seen stuff that he's worked on, because he's the guy that all of the labels, whether it's Blue Underground, Vinegar Syndrome, Synapse, they all go to him, and he's the guy that films and produces and directs, I'd say 85 to 90% of all the bonus features you see on all those discs. So like you see like the Elvira Mistress of the Dark collector's edition, he's the guy that's in his studio, and that's where he filmed it. So he let us use his space because him and Kyle knew each other. But I come in and I sit down, and like, I don't know anything about lighting, and Kyle's setting up these big lights. I'm like, oh, what's that stuff for? And he's like, oh, Bill. He's like, you have so much to learn.
The thing too, like that I've noted, like a lot of people, when the first time you see lighting, I think people don't realize how long it takes to do it right.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable how long it takes.
You could spend hours.
Yeah, we like, I think like we did Ted's interview at like 3:00 in the afternoon, and we started setting up lighting at like noon.
Yeah, that
so
sounds about right.
It took that long. But so for me, it was intimidating because I don't know any of this stuff. But like, one of my strong suits and one of the things that I've always really felt that I excelled at is you sit me down in front of somebody to do an interview, and I can interview like really good, sounding really very technical right there. Yeah, I could do a good job. But like that's why I can kill it on the interviews, because the first interview we ever did for OTC that was face to face was Bruce Campbell. So like, you want to talk about trial by fire, that's right. How it is. So once we go, I mean, I was obviously nervous, but once we got going, and Ted was into the project because we had sent him the idea for it, and about cult movies and technology and this stuff, and he was like, yeah, this sounds great. So, and he was into it, so it actually made it really easy, and he was fun, and he was joking around, like, so he didn't take himself too serious. It went really, really well for like that first interview, and that kind of set the tone to go from there. He was at Rock and Shock this weekend, so we caught up with him, and I was afraid that he wasn't even going to remember doing it, because all those guys do so many things. But Ted doesn't do a lot of documentaries, so we kind of lucked out. And he was like, "When's it coming out?" He's like, "I've been looking for it. What's going on with it?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So, he took a T-shirt and a poster and stuff, so I knew he remembered doing it. He was like, "I had a really good time doing this, so I've been looking forward to seeing it."
Nice, that's awesome. What over the course of the 2-ish years that it took to produce it, like, what was your biggest challenge?
I mean, I think that it was just kind of like getting the timing right on everything, because I lived in the Boston area and Kyle lived in LA. It was trying to coordinate interviews where we were going to both be able to be there. So there was a few times where there was interviews like I had to do 3 or so on my own, and he had to do a couple on his own. But like, the coordination of working so far apart, I think, was probably the toughest thing, because we had a 3-hour time difference on top of it. So when we're communicating with each other, obviously I'm up early in the morning, and he is still asleep for 3 hours. So it's the type of thing where we had to kind of get it together. And then I think after that, the toughest thing was, once we were done filming everything, really kind of trying to pare down the proper narrative. That was the thing that I think took us the most amount of time. Like, we were good at kind of laying out an outline with the questions that were asked, so that we knew what we were getting from each person, and we were keeping up with, like, we would do the interview, and then I would go through and review it. I would, in just a notebook, timestamp everything that I thought was interesting. So then Kyle would go and then pull all those clips, and then he would separate them into folders. This is the folder with everyone talking about cable. This is the folder with everyone talking about DVD. This is the VHS files. This is this. This is this. So it was kind of like putting it together into that narrative that was going to flow, and who to use in what parts, because everyone said a lot of the same things, just in different ways. So we didn't want to have a lot of repeating stuff. So I think building the narrative was that biggest hurdle. But once it kind of got going, it kind of fell together pretty quickly.
What do you think, like, if you could go back and give yourself at the beginning of this process, like, one piece of advice, what do you think it would be?
Oh, gee.
Like, what's the thing you wish you knew at the beginning? You know what I mean? Like, you always get into the process and you're like, fuck, I wish I'd thought about this before.
I mean, the biggest thing would just kind of be like, maybe prepping with equipment and being sure that we had everything we needed ahead of time. Because we were lucky. Kyle used a camera he used to work for a company. He used to work for Digital Bolex, which is a camera company that they're no longer in business. But he was able to use one of the cameras. So we used this cool Digital Bolex camera for the first front of filming. But then he wasn't able to get it for like the second half of the filming. So we had to figure out what to do for a camera. So we ended up buying a Panasonic Lumix. But like, ahead of time, I would have been like, well, if we're not going to be able to use this camera the whole time, maybe we go in another direction and shoot with something else so that we can. It ended up working out great because the film looks very linear. It's not like the footage is weird. Like this looks like this, looks like this. So like all the interviews look well together. But I think maybe just being prepared with the equipment ahead of time instead of kind of maybe trying to scramble to like, oh, we need this, we need a new lav mic, or we need,
Yeah.
we don't have lighting or something like that. Because we did it all out of our own pockets for the most part. Like we had some help from one of our executive producers, but it was all like, okay, we have to pull footage, so we needed a Blu-ray ripper, and none of us had a Blu-ray ripper. So it's like all that type of stuff. I think maybe make a list ahead of time.
Was there anybody, in the process of interviewing people that surprised you, or like who was your most interesting interview, you think?
I mean, we talked to so many interesting people. Like obviously, like guys like Lloyd Kaufman are just like this crazy wealth of knowledge.
And he'll just he'll literally, you ask one question and he'll just ramble for an hour.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, like, I mean, Lloyd's obviously in a ton of documentaries, so it was kind of one of those. Do we really want to have Lloyd, because he's in everything? And we're like, well, if we can get Lloyd to talk about things that Lloyd doesn't normally talk about, that'll work. So, I mean, you get through that shtick that's the Lloyd Kaufman shtick of like trauma this and trauma that. But like he was super engaged in the interview because we were able to kind of get him out, not outside of his comfort zone, but outside of that I run trauma thing. And he was able to really talk about like the importance of the different aspects of the technology and kind of where you go with that stuff. So that was really interesting because he was able to be a different type of Lloyd than I'd kind of really seen before. An incredibly nice guy too, on top of it. And the other one that I always like to call back to is a gentleman by the name of Steve Scarlatta, who he was the writer of Beyond the Gates, and he was one of the producers on Jodorowsky's Dune. And he's a dude I've known through OTC for almost 10 years. And his interview is just like magic. Like it's funny, it's super informed, and like he talks about movies that like you would never, like, Warriors of the Lost World. Like who's going to bring up that in a documentary? I mean, this guy can wax nostalgic about it for 20 minutes. I keep telling Kyle that what I want to do is I want to put his interview on the Blu-ray unedited because it's that good and that enjoyable.
Was there anybody you tried to get that you couldn't, or any misconnections in the process?
I mean, yeah, there was like, I mean, because there was a lot of those like kind of like those, we're gonna shoot for the moon. And, guys like Tarantino, like we never even got past his publicist. So like, there were some guys, we really wanted to try to get Sid Haig, because Sid Haig has been a guy that's been in cult films since, the late 60s, and just weren't able to work it out. We were going after some blaxploitation stars that like Fred Williamson, and we had a slight back and forth with Pam Grier at one point. But being such a small production, sometimes it's tough to really sell yourself.
Yeah.
When they're like, oh, is it SAG? Is it, who you working with? Who's your cinematographer? And it's like, well, it's us. It's these two dudes, and we're working on it. But most of the people that we contacted that we wanted, once they kind of found out what the project was and kind of the importance that it has, especially like for independent filmmakers, they were on board, and we're like, what can we do? And as long as we could work the scheduling out, that was the toughest part of it. But everyone was into it. I mean, I can't say that there was anyone that we was like a near miss that was like would have made or break the film.
So what's next at this point? Like where are you right now? I mean, obviously we're in spooky season. There's been some
man, it's been a busy month, dude.
Yeah, you guys are just in Salem, right?
We'll be in Salem on the 27th here. Let me get the schedule up, because we've got a bunch of stuff we've booked. I've got a bunch of stuff that we booked that I can't actually talk about yet either. So. But I know this coming weekend we are in the Knoxville Horror Film Festival, which is Knoxville, Tennessee. Sunday, October 21st. We're playing at 3:45. It's at the Central Cinema in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're right before the Shockwaves live podcast they're doing over there, which should be cool. And then this weekend on Friday, October 19th, we're in the Las Vegas Sin City Horror Fest, which is at the beautiful Palms Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, and we're playing right before Halloween. So that's
nice.
Yeah, original Halloween too, not the new one. And then next week, the same weekend is Cinema Salem. Cinema Salem is Saturday, October 27th at the Witch City Horror Film Fest. That is at 4 p.m. at the Cinema Salem, which is the like old crotchety like cinema in downtown Salem. So that should be pretty crazy being Halloween weekend.
Yeah.
And we're also playing in New York that weekend. We're part of the New York World Film Market also on the 27th, but I don't have a time on that, and that's kind of a weird thing. But if anyone's going to that, look for us. I don't know the exact information. And then we got a couple weeks off, and then Sunday, November 18th, we will be at the Buried Alive Film Festival in Atlanta, Georgia, which should be a pretty good time. And then there's some more stuff. We got some. I think we have a UK thing that we might have booked for early next year, and a couple other film fests that are coming together.
And then obviously distribution is the ultimate goal. I mean, is that something you guys have even approached at this point, or are we more just trying to get it in play as much places as you can?
We're trying to play it wherever we can. Kyle and I have obviously had some discussions about what we would like to do. So in like a perfect world, we'd love to try to go with, some sort of streaming service, to get like like a Shudder or like a
Yeah.
Netflix or somebody like that, where we can kind of, because that I feel like this documentary really fills in that kind of void for people to kind of question a lot of the stuff about the new stuff, in terms of streaming and like downloading and things like that. So I think a streaming home would be great for it, but we definitely want to do like a some type of collector's edition Blu-ray or DVD down the road. But we want to give it a good festival run. We don't want to rush anything. That seems to be, I mean, that's the question that we get from everybody is like, oh, when can I buy a copy of it? And I don't have an answer, unfortunately, but I think the safe thing to say is
Eventually.
Spring next year, I think would probably be the safest thing to say.
We'll get there. Very nice. Well, where can people go to like keep track of this stuff? You know what I mean? Like, where is it playing, and just what's going on with it?
Social media, man. We got Twitter and Instagram are both our big things. We do a lot on Instagram, so you can follow us on both at Film Freaks Movie on both of those, and then we have a pretty active Facebook page too. So you just search Survival of the Film Freaks on Facebook. We have events set up for all of the screenings, and the new trailer that we just released is over there, and pretty much anything you want to know.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you for spending some time with us today. For you guys at home, that's Survival of the Film Freaks, also Film Freaks. Also, don't forget to check out Outside the Cinema in your pod catcher of choice. All right, guys, that's going to do it, and we'll talk to you soon.